Good day, everyone. I am Jelaine A. Umanya, a Blast 3A student. So today I will tackle to you what is qualitative research methods. Qualitative research methods by Len Westbrook. How do you know if qualitative research is right for your study? So now, let us know what is qualitative research and its focus. According to CIQ Office of Research and Doctoral Services, qualitative research deals with making meaning and understanding through rich description. The focus of this research method is on quality or meaning of experience, specifically the meaning of human experience. In qualitative research, the purpose is to understand, describe, discover, or generate hypotheses or generate a theory. Naturalism is an approach that posits reality as holistic, based in the perception of individuals and communities, and continually changing. Theory formation requires an organic, continuous process designed to understand phenomena rather than to test hypotheses. Critical theory underpins many aspects of qualitative research that develop from the Marxist approach to social research by pushing for wide analytic lenses that more fully account for the social, cultural, political, and economic complexities of modern society. The drive to mitigate or even dissolve social injustice underpins the choice of research questions, methodology, and analysis. The constructivist approach to making those choices asserts that individuals and groups actually construct reality, which can therefore be properly understood only from the perspective of the context in which they function. The naturalistic paradigm only recently has been accepted and applied to professional schools. Nevertheless, resultant theories and major studies have been open doors for qualitative work in LIS. To such extent, the critical focus is on the quality rather than the methods of the study. In any research settings, the research problem determines the research approach and the choice of methods. No single approach fits every problem. A reasoned choice must be made. The direct continuity between research question and research design is essential and requires, therefore, clear explanation. In LIS, qualitative research is usually most useful when the information interaction concerns are so new, so complex, or so unexplored that researchers are working to understand the cognitive, affective, and behavioral aspect of the phenomenon. If enough is known of an area to sustain a priori patterning, hypothesis information, or even theory explication, then the positivist approach with its more quantitative methods might be used. If so little known of an area that the sample identification of the naturalistic approach with its more qualitative methods provide valuable insight. In between these two extremes lie a range of mixed methods approaches. Given the rapidly changing environment of LIS work, this positivist naturalist decision requires a focus on what best answers the research problem. Still relatively rare in LIS research, most social science scholars accept mixed method work as an addition to their paradigm tool key. A mixed method or multi-methods approach in some cases provide the necessary array of data. The mixed methods approach posits as false dichotomy the absolute first choice of either qualitative or quantitative methods, sometimes considered the third paradigm. The mixed method deliberate recognition of a full spectrum or externally and internally realized phenomena speak to, for example, usability testing in LIS, conceptualizing methods as exploratory or confirmatory rather than as qualitative or quantitative supports the deliberate and effective combination of methods. There are four basic principles guide mixed method design. First, determine and adhere to the theoretical impetus underpinning the project. Second, work to account for the impact of the method that is brought into the primary methodological thrust. Third, drive the design decisions from the assumption of the base method. And lastly, employ only the essential datasets. This principle encourages the mixing or linking method, which is more appropriate than integrating them because it encourages a more thoughtful and deliberate approach to building from the strengths of different methods as they relate to research questions. As in any research involving human beings, a number of ethical concerns demand careful attention. Naturalistic settings compound the usual issues of participant confidentiality and harmless involvement. Harmless involvement is the second ethical issue to consider. While confidentiality is meant to ensure that participants are not harmed by the revelation of their studied words or actions, this issue refers to any harm that might issue as a result of simply participating in the study. An ethical and trustworthiness issue arises regularly in life history work, and it is inherent in most face-to-face qualitative work, namely the balance point between supporting participant revelation and shaping that revelation. In some cases, participants want to feel that they are being understood and that what they say holds special meaning for the researcher. Researchers must balance or carefully move between states of intentional listening with all the deliberate use of follow-up questions such as listening requires, and immersion in the participant tale with all the potential for personal connection and validation that such immersive action can generate. Feminist research raises ethical concern from a political and social perspective. Feminist research is rooted in attention to the power dynamics of sex and gender with full awareness of the interplay of power dynamics in race, ethnicity, politics, economics, culture, and education. The impact of narrative. Participant-directed interviewing in which participants are encouraged to share their stories of difficult situations requires particular ethical consideration. While sharing difficult narrative can be empowering, cathartic, and even affirming for some, it requires interviews who respect both the disturbing content and potentially negative consequences for participants who essentially relive traumatic times in their lives. Since very few information-seeking situations involve actual physical or significant psychological harm to individuals, most studies are able to manage research ethics with the application of careful analysis. Constructing consequential ethics and non-consequential ethics provides a framework for many LIS decisions in the field. Consequential ethics argues that the result of an act determines its ethical value. That is, good consequences outweighing harmful consequences are the hallmark of an ethical act. The problem for qualitative researchers following this approach is that determining consequences in advance is almost impossible, much less determining how each participant would analyze the balance of good and harm on a personal level. Non-consequential ethics argues that consequences are not determinant of ethical actions but rather principles. The Kantian maxims or rules qualitative researchers employing non-sequential ethics use abstract as their guide while simultaneously striving to fully respect the study participant most immediately affected by their ethical stance. The consequential ethics perspective would push the researcher to break all confidentiality bonds by informing the two of each other's work in the expectation that global good could result from an earlier and more complete piece of cancer research. The non-consequential ethics perspective could push the researcher to maintain confidentiality without reference to the preferences of the participants or the needs of cancer patients in general. The act of gathering data for qualitative study is an evolving process rooted in ongoing analysis. It involves more than obtaining discrete units of information. Those data gathering is invention as a process rather than a procedure. It requires analytic judgment rather than a pre-planned routine. Design remains flexible throughout the study because you have to work out questions to examine new and themes that emerge during data gathering. No single formula provides the correct sample size for a qualitative study. The deep complexity and richness of the data are critical, but identifying a representative sample is not even a consideration since the purpose of the research is to understand, not to generalize. The two criteria for determining the right number of interview participants are sufficiency and saturation. Sufficiency refers to the effort to include all the subpopulation involved. Researchers should include two or more participants in demographic categories, example race, gender, age, contextual subgroup, example first year, sophomore, junior, and senior high school students, and location, example on-site and remote site workers. Saturation refers to the point at which critical elements of the study have become saturated, until further examples fail to add new nouns or to contradict what is understood. For example, in a study of the reasons behind library anxiety among first semester doctoral history students at a major research university, a researcher might interview 10 of the 14-member population, choosing those 10 carefully to include as many known variables among participants as possible, such as race, sex, and area of the study. If participant 8 through 10 yielded no new information, then there will be little point in insisting on a large sample. The most common sampling techniques in qualitative studies follow the thread of purpose. Rather than the probabilistic sampling or positivist approach, the naturalist approach starts with purpose for working with one type of participants rather than with another. In LIS research, the following methods may be most useful: maximum variety sampling, extreme case sampling, intensity sampling, and snowball sampling. In maximum variety sampling, this method seeks as heterogeneous sample as possible and is useful when seeking to identify patterns and commonalities that exist across otherwise divergent individuals. In extreme case sampling, this method selects participants who appear to exemplify characteristics of interest in order to clarify the critical issues in an area. For example, those who experience severe cases of library anxiety must be interviewed and observed to help identify key factors in the issue. In intensity sampling, this technique identifies participants who have a great deal of experience with the phenomenon. For example, in a study of a reference librarian use of tagging websites for research purposes, those who have used this technique for a substantial period will be selected over novices when taking an intensity sample. These methods identify participants who are linked through shared experiences, perspectives, or other factors. People who use library computer labs to play forbidden, group-based computer games might be identified through a snowball sampling. Subset of purposive sampling used in life history work include each of the previous methods as well as theoretical case technique in which participants are chosen on the basis specific critical incidents that pertain the phenomena in action, even if these incidents are rare. Observation is a broad category of data gathering in which naturalistic researcher must choose a point of balance between observing and participating. The primary advantage of observation is the opportunity it provides to determine how well the observed and self-reported data match. Observation can also help counter the ill effects of time order, history, and maturation. For much LIS research, the setting varies along the following four continua. First, number of participants. Second, public versus private. Third, size of the observable action. And lastly, the staff or public. Interviews are a valuable qualitative method for researchers who make effective choices along the continuum between structured and unstructured interviews. A structured interview is the mode of choice when the interviewer knows what he or she does not know and can therefore frame appropriate questions to find it out, while the unstructured interview is the mode of choice when the interviewer does not know what he or she doesn't know and must therefore rely on the respondent to tell him or her. Effective questions are framed so as to build upon the shared understanding, whether personal or cultural, between researcher and participant. That shared understanding can ease participant concern regarding ego-threatening questions, the inability to remember certain types of information, and their tendency to generalize. Each method of delivery has its advantages and disadvantages. An in-person questionnaire allows the researcher to clear up any obvious misunderstanding on the spot, but it is time-consuming. A telephone questionnaire allows contact with distant participants, but it is difficult to convince people to complete on without advanced written preparation. Mailed questionnaires are relatively simple to conduct, but require significant follow-up to produce sufficient response rates. Finally, point-of-contact questionnaires are simple and affordable, but do limit responses to those who choose to or who can be persuaded to complete the forms on site. Obviously, questionnaires that are deeply embedded in the daily context of the participants are somewhat more likely to generate naturalistic responses than are highly artificial instruments. Two principles of qualitative data analysis recur in virtually all descriptors of it. First, analysis is an ongoing process that feeds back into the research design right up to the last moment of data gathering. Second, whatever theory, model, or working hypothesis eventually develop must grow naturally from the data analysis rather than standing to the side as a prior statement that the data will affirm or refute. Discourse analysis, developed by Michael Foucault, has the capacity to track historically the origins of and challenges to mainstream ideas and to illustrate marginalized ideas through an open, conceptualized process of discovery that centers on analysis of power dynamics. Discourse analysis can be linguistically or culturally based. The purpose of linguistic-based discourse analysis is to gauge the efficacy of linguistic exchanges aimed at accomplishing particular objectives. The purpose of cultural or social-based discourse analysis is to study the circuitous routes taken by what is said, refutes, borrows, opposes, adopts, manipulates, ignores, appropriates, and varies with has been said. What is content analysis basics? Content analysis uses a set of procedures to make valid inferences from text. These inferences are about the sender of the message itself, or the audience of the message. Content analysis is based on the premise that many words from interviews, observation, and documents can be reduced to organize into categories in which words or word units share the same central meaning. Content analysis is applied in the qualitative, quantitative, and mixed method studies. The constant comparative methods, codified by Glaser and Starius, is generally recognized as one of the most effective means of qualitative content analysis. It involves joint coding and analysis during the continual review of data to granularly form categories. Originally, the constant comparative method was described in 4 stages. First, comparing incidents applicable to each category. Second, integrating categories and their properties. Third, delimiting the theory, and fourth, writing the theory. Comparative analysis can be used to generate substantive theory and formal theory. Substantive theory refers to specific areas such as alpha keys and internet search strategies. Formal theory refers to conceptual areas such as information seeking, patterns, and relevance criteria.
So what is a code? Paraphrasing Saldana, a code symbolically assigns a summative or evocative attribute for a portion of qualitative data. You're doing research to understand why things happen, what are relationships between phenomena. So when you're coding, you're looking at your qualitative information, your data, for patterns of similarity. So once you've done interviews or focus groups or participant observations a number of times, now you're looking across those different experiences for similarities or differences with respect to what people say or what people do. We use codes specifically to refer to our research questions. You might be looking at frequency. How often do they do something? Or how often do they say that they do something? You could also be looking at sequence. Sequence is particularly useful for thinking about causation. How often do they do it? What do people do? And do they do it before or after something? So in order to think about causation, you need to be able to say that A comes before B and that therefore A causes B. This is how qualitative work can be quite useful, is that you can in fact code for sequencing and thinking about causation. Some people code to understand what's going on. They're using exploratory coding. They try as much as possible to just let the text tell them what's happening. Other people know which questions are most important, and they're going to disregard, 20 to 80% of the interviews that they've conducted in order to get to the meaty questions that they really want people to answer. Both are fine ways of going about coding, but it depends on your discipline. It depends on your research agenda. So if you know which questions are important, if you know what you're going to focus on, then you've already done some coding in your head. And in that case, you can predefine your codes and say, I'm going to code on emotion, I'm going to code on X, Y, and Z. You can assign that code a color or a number or whatever, and then you can go in to the text and code that way so that you're just marking it according to the code. So some of it is very inductive, meaning that the coding process happens iteratively by virtue of going through it and building your theory from the ground up. It's called grounded theory. And some coding is very deductive. You know what's important. It's just a matter of pulling out themes and the codes that help you clarify an idea.
Grounded theory.
This research derives a general, abstract theory of a process, action, or interaction grounded in the views of participants. It involves using multiple stages of data collection and the refinement and the interrelationships or categories of information.
There are 5 points specific to the presentation of general research findings that were mentioned. First, in almost any forum, it may be necessary to explain the concept behind naturalistic methods. Second, qualitative research requires great depth and explication of both data gathering and data analysis. As does sound qualitative research with care taken to recognize that quality control must be adjusted to context. Third, while effect of particular value to qualitative research requires the researcher to make some return to community. Fourth, in almost every case, researchers must make active, careful decisions about giving voice to the participant. Finally, if research is simply to help understand the world, then the act of scholars publishing solely for other scholars in the same field makes a modest contribution to the goal. How do we know if qualitative research method is right for your study? First, consider the nature of phenomenon you want to deal with or the phenomenon you want to study. Second, determine what you want to know about the said phenomena. And then third, be clear about your purpose or your goal.